Okay, good evening, everyone. So we're taking a look at the first pasuk in this week's Parsha Emor, and the first pasuk is written there on the top of the page. Vayoma Hashem al Moshe, and God spoke to Moshe, Emor el Cohanim. God spoke to Moshe and he said, "Speak to the Cohanim." Who are the Cohanim? Bnei Aharon. A lot of Meforshim talk about why they're both Cohanim and Bnei Aharon. We'll see one comment on that. We're not going to do much about that. V'amat alehem, and speak to them, lenefesh, to any nefesh, soul, lo yitameh ba'amav. You shall not impurify yourselves within the people. This is the famous halacha that Cohanim are not allowed to become tameh in general. Cohanim are supposed to refrain from coming into contact with things which are impure, tameh. They try hard to not become tameim, but specifically, Cohanim do not go to funerals, are not in the same building with bodies, with corpses, people who've passed away, unless they're the seven close relatives. So Cohanim can, except for the Kohen Gadol, which is a separate issue, Cohanim can become Tameim. They can go to the cemetery and be involved in the preparation of the body for death for the seven close relatives, which are mother, brother, mother, father, brother, sister, son, daughter, and spouse. So those are the seven that they're allowed to. But even though we will mention something about that in a few minutes, what we're really going to talk about is the fact that the format of this pasuk is different from what we usually expect. Most of the mitzvot in the Torah are introduced by V'yadaber Hashem, and God spoke to Moshe, instead of Vayomer Hashem, okay? And God spoke to Moshe, Lemor, speaking. So God spoke to Moshe, and that Moshe should tell us, and that phrase, that pasuk, appears in the Torah 175 times, far and away the most common verse in the Torah, and it's a very powerful verse. We hear it so much, we tend to not even think about it, but there's a Hasidic story about that there was a Hasidic Rebbe that was giving a shir, and he started the shir by quoting a mitzvah, but he started with the verse, V'yadaber Hashem al Moshe Lemor. And there was a Hasid in the class, okay, Reb Shmuel, who's sitting there and he's going, wow, God spoke to Moshe. It's amazing. Hashem speaks to human beings. And it's like he couldn't stop repeating that. And it was annoying to the other students in the class. So finally, Reb Shmuel goes out into the hall and he's still saying, oh, it's a gewalt, it's amazing, oh my God. And when the class is over, the students go up to complain to the Rebbe. He says, you got to get rid of Shmuel. It's just, bothersome. And so the Rebbe looks at them and said, I can't get rid of him. He's the only one who understands what's really happening. And what's really happening is, it's really remarkable that Hashem really told Moshe, and Moshe really told us. And nothing is more important than that idea. And so that verse appears 175 times, as opposed to in the Nevi'im. There, it's much more, instead of, this is exactly what Hashem said to Moshe, and then Moshe told us exactly. It's generally the phraseology in the Nevi'im is Ko Amar Hashem. This is approximately what Hashem said. So that's the big difference between those two phrases. But a lot of the commentaries are concerned here, how come we have a different introduction for the mitzvah for Kohanim than we have from the vast majority of the other 613 mitzvot? So Rashi right away begins and says, say, Vayomer, and again thou shalt say to them. The repetition is intended to admonish the adults about their children also, that they should teach them to avoid defilement. So in other words, usually when Moshe speaks to Bnei Israel, it's just, this is what you have to do. But when he speaks to the Cohanim themselves accept some responsibility for continuing to teach these ideas to their own children and many other ideas to all of Klal Yisrael, because the Cohanim and to a certain extent the Leviim were actually ends up becoming the educators for most of the nation. Okay, so that's Rashi, very famous. The Ramban, Nachmanides, says the plain sense of the verses is as follows. The meaning of Emor, say, is like that of Dabir. So he poo-poos the entire problem. He said, really, there's no difference between Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe Lemor and Vayomer Hashem el Moshe v'amarta. That's really, it's basically more or less the same thing. No one else is going to agree with that. Everyone else is going to say, oh, no, this is very special. And so he says, give ear to Amorai. Listen to what I have to say. O Eternal is like Divarai, is like my words. A similar case is Imre Emet, the words of truth. And so also you find in many places that both are used in one verse, Daber and V'amarta. So he says the two terms can be used interchangeably. Now, most of the other commentaries don't like this idea. It's a tremendous idea amongst most Bible scholars that in Tanakh, there is no such thing as synonyms. Whenever a word is used, it's used because it's the perfect word for what needs to be communicated at this point. So we're trying to stay away from this idea, oh, they mean the same thing. Okay. Then he says, Dabir, speak to the children of Israel, Vermata, say to them, such usage being found in those sections where he, Hashem, wishes to warn them strongly because of the stringency of the matter or their habit to commit that sin. So he is saying that V'yadabir is a little bit stronger than this one. Thus, Emor to the priest, V'yamata unto them, it's like Dabir V'yamata. Now, many scholars says that the meaning of Dabir is like that of the term Kriya, calling. Thus, call unto the children of Israel, that they assemble before you. And you shall say to them the following. And simply Emor to the priest means call them to assemble themselves and to listen. But here he warns the priest that they should never defile themselves for the dead, even in a time when they do not come into the sanctuary, this being a mark of distinction to them. So he's saying we want this to be different because this was something special for the Cohanim. It's not that it really means anything different, but we do want to distinguish the way the material get expressed to the Kohen as opposed to the regular Jews. Okay, the Kliyakar. Don't we already know that the Kohanim are the sons of Aaron? He's asking on the next phrase. He says, Moshe, talk to the Kohanim who are the sons of Aaron. Wait a minute. Every Kohen, at least in that time, is a son of Aaron. And even today, we consider them B'nai Aaron, that every Kohen must be a direct descendant of Aaron. So why the repetition? The answer is that Aaron was holy to Hashem. He was the source of the holiness of the Kahuna. Holiness was drawn from him to his sons as well. However, they were not like him in every way. Therefore, Aaron, the source of holiness, was not permitted to become impure for any relative. In other words, when Nadav and Avihu die back a few weeks ago in Parshat Shmini, Aharon himself does not go to Leviah. So, and we learn from this that the Kohen Gadol also can't go to the funerals of his closest relatives, as opposed to regular Kohanim who were allowed to. Now, today, of course, we don't have a Kohen Gadol, We don't have an Aharon replacement. So today all Cohanim are in the same category. But once upon a time, we had that major distinction. The sons of Aharon, however, who received holiness through Aharon, have two aspects in and of themselves that have no holiness, but from the aspect of their being Aharon's sons, they do have holiness. Therefore, their laws are split. From the aspect of their portion of holiness, they must not become impure for distant relatives or other Jews. But since they are somewhat removed from Moshe, they're the sons of, Aaron. They're the sons of Aaron. They're one step removed. So they are permitted to become impure for the 7 close relatives. Okay. Rabbeinu Bechaye. The verse begins, say to the priests, and then repeats and tell them. Why? If you say to them, that should be good enough. Why do you have to and say to them? Say to them and say to them. Why double? Here's the sequence. Say to the priests whatever was written in the previous paragraph and add the new laws applicable specifically to the priests. The reasons that the priests had to be taught that the laws in the previous chapter, chapter 20, back last week in Kedoshim, was that they were the teachers of the Jews and had to know all of those legislation concerning the civil law, because they were the teachers and sometimes the judges within the Jewish community. Our sages say this means that the adults were to warn the minors about these laws and use them while not yet of age to perform these tasks. So other people would have their kids. Now we know some people do this with little kids. We only do it with kids that are like under the age of 3 or 4 to like do something on Shabbat that we can't do, turn on a light or something like that. But he's saying that it was a common thing that adults allowed the kids to do things that weren't permitted to the adults. And it just like went over, eventually they started, being more careful about these issues. But at a certain point, we just let them do it. We couldn't tell them to do it, but we didn't stop them from doing it. This warning includes prohibitions, whether in ritual impurity, violations of the Shabbat, forbidden food, etc. If minors choose to carry out such tasks without having been urged to do so, the parents need not stop them. The question is, until what age? That's a big argument. Most commentaries say once a kid gets to 6, we should at that point stop them from doing things that are prohibited. We can't tell them to do things that are prohibited already from the time they're at least 3. But some people say it's until 9. We don't really. Most people say it's 6, but okay. This warning includes prohibitions, whether in ritual impurity, violations of the Shabbat, forbidden food, etc. If the minors choose to carry out such tasks without having been urged to do so, the parents need not stop them. It writes, say to them to teach us that we do have to train the young priests already to distance themselves from all that is forbidden to the adult priests. So in other words, the children of the priests have a greater responsibility to begin training and keeping the kids more involved in the halachic universe. I guess we could say more kadosh, that they had to be holy at an earlier age. Okay, we're not going to talk that much about the Cohanim anymore. Basically, that's we're now going to talk about the ramifications of this particular law. And so the next one we want to take a look at is the Sfat Emet. Of course, the Sfat Emet is the Gera Rebbe, lived in Sub-Ger. Gur was a suburb of Warsaw in the second half of the 1800s. And he died in 1896. And he goes back to Emor ve'amarta. Speak and speak. What's that mean? Indicating 2 levels of telling. Moshe is instructed to tell the Cohanim, who must then convey the message to others. So the difference between Vayedaber Hashem al Moshe Lemor and then Moshe speaks to Bnei Israel, he's telling us, and we don't have any responsibility. Regular Jews have no responsibility to tell anybody else. However, the Cohanim, it's speak to them. And again, it mentions speaking again because as Cohanim, they have a responsibility to continue to teach this material. They have a higher level of responsibility, not just in the specific laws, but in the general atmosphere of what it means to be a Kohen. So Hashem's words allow us to find purity in every place and state, as his words give existence to everything. Words from God give existence to everything. That idea harkens back, and we're going to see this idea in the Hirsch in about 5 minutes. This idea harkens back to the first chapter of Breshit, Vayomer Hashem. And God says, let there be light. In other words, God's speech, as opposed to us. Well, I guess this is before we had these robots around our houses who we can talk to and they respond. But it used to be only God could speak and things would happen. Today, you can speak to whatever Alexa or whatever it is, and she'll turn on the lights or whatever. But okay, but before that, the only one who could speak and things would magically happen was God. Hashem's words allow us to find purity in every place and state, as his words give existence to everything. God's words create. It is the mission of Bnei Yisrael. It's our job, not just the Cohanim, but our job to elevate and purify these states, these different levels of existence. David HaMelech requested special protection for Bnei Israel, asking Hashem to guard them as they descend into dark places to then elevate them. In other words, not just the Cohanim, but every Jew has to feel that the words of Hashem can be something that motivates them, elevates them, makes them achieve higher levels of Kedusha. While Hashem's words are pure at their source, impurities attach to them through the process of descending from level to level. And then it has a word that's transliterated, hishtalshalut. Hishtalshalut means to like cascade down level by level. Think of like a waterfall that has many like levels, and the water keeps going lower and lower. So in other words, when God says it, everything is pure and wonderful. But as it comes lower down to us, it can lose some of the purity and kedusha, sanctity that it had. This is the meaning of Emor ve'amarta. This is what it means with the Cohanim. Speak to them, and then somebody else speaks. What happened? Indicating that Hashem's words change from stage to stage. It's almost a little sad. It's like almost like a game of telephone. One person says it, and he tells the next person, but by the end, the whole message can get garbled. And it's a little scary when the Rebbe, the Sfat Emet, says it this way. But it's true. It can happen. And it's our job to do the best we can to give over exactly what it was we got from our revered parents or teachers or Rebbes. And he's bringing in this problem that is very real in every type of education. But we're really worried about it here in the Jewish transmission of our Torah and our customs. This change allows for the mission of perfecting the world, as the original words leave no space for impurity. The original words were pure, but over time, bad things can happen, misinterpretations can come in, and we have to work hard to get rid of as much of the impurity, the mistakes, the problems, the misinterpretations, the inability to apply a law from thousands of years ago to a situation nowadays. That's why we need Gedolim to help us in this process. But the Rebbe is bringing up a real problem that from generation to generation, the things can get garbled, and we have to work hard to keep it as pure as possible. Now, we're going to change to almost a grammatical point of view here in Rav Hirsch. Rav Hirsch, like a number of Pashtanim, interpreters of the in the 19th century, the 1800s, was very much concerned with the usage of the words, and he believed, like the Malbim and many others, that in the Torah there's no such thing as synonyms. That if we say Vayomer instead of V'yadaber, it's because the message is different. And so he has a beautiful idea about how we're supposed to understand this difference in the communication from God to Moshe to Aharon. V'yamarta starts a fresh new speech, new chapter, new speech, an independent speech having its own meaning. It is not like daber. Amira is different from dibor, okay? Two different words meaning different kinds of verbal communication. What is daber? Which aims at giving the short, curt idea, while amarta is a complete explanation of all the details, giving understanding of the spirit of the law. Daber is quick. Amira says whatever has to be said until the other party totally understands what's going on. It appeals to the mind and the heart. Amira, I'm speaking to more than just your ears. I am speaking to your brain, and I'm speaking to your heart, your emotions, your kishkas, if you will. Daber and Omer differ as the English words speaking and informing. Now, of course, he wrote this in German, so I have no idea what the German words are, but I found an English translation and who said it this way, that Daber is speaking, Omer is informing. It's much more expansive. Whereas Daber is the concise expression of a thought, Emor is addressing the same to the mind and feelings of another person. Daber, I just say it. You either take it or you don't. Amira, I am really trying to communicate with you clearly. I want you to imbibe what it is that I'm saying. One can speak to oneself but not inform. I find that idea interesting. In other words, people talk to themselves. Oh, don't forget to take out the garbage tomorrow morning. Oh, what time do I have to wake? We talk to ourselves all the time. There's nothing wrong with that. But we can't inform ourselves of something because I either know it or I don't know it. It's not like I have a split personality. I can say things to remind myself, but I can't truly inform myself because I'm the same being inside that brain. And it's either knows it or it doesn't know it. If I'm informing myself, I probably have a major psychological issue that I should probably get some help for. Whereas Daber is the concise expression of a thought, and Emor is addressing the same to the mind and the feelings of another person, of the recipient. The complete explanation and development of the thought. Daber is the short version of Torah Shebichtav. Dabir is the way it's written in the Torah, concise and short, brief. However, Emor is the full explanation as it appears in the Torah Shebaal Peh, the oral tradition, which explains a lot of the ideas in the Torah. And we wouldn't understand them without this accompanying commentary on the Torah. Hence, an Amora, who are the rabbis of the Gemara, and Amora is the interpreter of the law. They're called Amoraim because they explain the halacha for us in the Talmud. So we speak of the Aseret Hadibrot. On the 10 Commandments, on the 2 tablets, were 10 relatively concise statements, especially on the second one, where most of them were just 2 words for each mitzvah. The first side was a little bit more extended, but basically they're really like a shorthand style of what these mitzvot are. We're told to keep Shabbat, but we're not told how to keep Shabbat. There's a lot of stuff that we have to do or not do to preserve and guard the Shabbat. However, the 10 Amirot to create the cosmos. In other words, when God said, "Let there be light," God didn't just let the cosmos know that light was supposed to appear. Hashem really explained or did everything necessary to make sure there would be light and make sure there would be a human being. That was the first and the last of the 10 Dibrot. And so Amirot. So when we get the full picture, it's an Amirah. When we're getting the Reader's Digest shortened, curt version, it's a Dibor. It's a Dibor. And I think there's a lot to be said for this idea here in Rav Hirsch. The word of the Torah is Dibor, concise, waiting to be interpreted and carried out. But the Cohanim are getting Amirah. Moshe and Aharon and the Cohanim are getting a full explanation because they have a special role to play, as opposed to most mitzvot. This is the mitzvah. Later, I'll explain it to you. Okay, the next comment is going to take me a few minutes. It's Rav Amital. Rav Yehuda Amital Olav Shalom was the founder of Yeshiva Paratzion, and together with Rav Lichtenstein, Rav Aharon Lichtenstein, they were for 40 years together the Rosh Yeshiva. And they were both very special people, very different people. Of course, Rabbi Aaron was brought up in America and has a college education and a PhD from Harvard. And Rav Amital, on the other hand, was a Holocaust survivor who learned in Cheder and had a relatively, although he had some good rebbeim, and he was related to some very famous European rabbanim, like his father-in-law was Rav Isa Zalman Meltzer. I mean, he was connected to the Gedolim of the world of Torah, but he didn't go to university and didn't get a PhD, and he as well served in the army, which Reb Lichtenstein didn't. I mean, they're just 2 different people, but they really work beautifully together. Okay, so he's talking, and Rivka and I, just on a personal note, Rivka and I at Shabbos meals read Little Divrei Torah from Rabbi Amital, and they're just very beautiful, not just informative, but we get this sense of purity and holiness, and we find them very inspiring. This is a little longer piece than most of the short Divrei Torah in the book that we're using, but the idea is very beautiful. Our Parsha speaks about the sanctity of the Cohanim. Continuing the theme of the previous Parsha, Kedoshim, You shall be holy. In other words, in the previous parsha, we're emphasizing every Jew. In this Torah reading, we're more discussing the Cohanim, at least at the beginning. But what the Torah means by the term holy is different from its commonly accepted significance today. And you can tell what he's going to say now bothers him. I mean, he was really concerned about a lot of modern issues in living Judaism. Today, when the general public speaks of holy people, they refer to miracle workers, mystics, people who exist on a higher spiritual plane. That, he's a holy man. He usually by that they mean someone who's not like the rest of us. But when we investigate Torah holiness, we see that it is something very different. Each person shall fear his mother and his father, and you shall observe my Sabbaths. The Torah mentions observing Shabbat along with honoring parents. Further on, we read, you shall not steal, nor deal falsely. This is on last week's parsha. Not curse the deaf, nor place a stumbling block before the blind. You shall not hate your brother in your heart. That's what makes you holy. Holy doesn't mean that you exist on another plane. Holy means you're very careful and nice about your behavior patterns vis-a-vis other people. This parsha goes on to list almost all of the commandments between man and his fellow. The Torah emphasizes that there is no difference between the commandment of Shabbat and honoring parents. That's why they put them in the same pasuk. The spiritual mitzvot and the mitzvot bein adam la'adam, the mitzvot of interpersonal relationships are equally holy. If anything, the holiest one is how we treat other people. Remember what Rabbi Akiva said. You should love your fellow like you love yourself. Rabbi Akiva's very short, pithy comment on that is, Zeh klal gadol b'Torah. That's the greatest single principle in the Torah, is how we treat our fellow human being. And all of that is not only important, but is really emphasized here in Rav Amital. I'm going to repeat. The Torah emphasizes that there is no difference between the commandment of Shabbat and honoring parents, which arises from a person's natural morality. Our natural morality and our divine morality must be in sync. Both commandments lead to holiness. The Torah explains that what makes a person holy is not all kinds of ethereal, lofty things, but rather the simplest foundations of interpersonal relationships. The holiest thing you can do is be kind to another. Nothing is holier than that. This is true holiness, being connected to the world and behaving in accordance with fundamental morality towards others, not isolating oneself and engaging in higher matters. Someone who thinks, I'm going to go off on a mountaintop and contemplate my navel, that person is missing the point. I mean, there's nothing wrong with a little meditation here and there, but that can't be the focus. The purpose of the meditation is to get me back in the ball game. And the ball game is about how we treat each other. That's what Rav Amital is saying, and I feel very strongly he's right. Even though I like the idea of periodically doing a little meditation, but that's just for me. It's not doesn't make the world a holy place. The thing that makes the world a holy place is how I behave towards others. The Kotzker Rebbe commented on the verse, "You shall be holy people unto me." That God does not need more angels. God's not looking for us to become angels. God's looking for us to become He is looking for holy people. That's the trick. I can be and must be holy as a human being. I shouldn't try to be an angel. After this, I understand better the prohibition of notar. Now, when I saw this, I was thinking, where is he going with this? Notar is a pretty esoteric halacha, which is actually on my mind today because today was Pesach Sheni. And so people that couldn't keep the first Pesach, and they had a makeup today, and tonight there were some people whose custom it is to eat matzah because it's like a makeup for the Seder. So tonight, if someone missed the first Pesach and they brought a Korban Pesach this afternoon, they had to finish it before the morning. Why? There's a halacha. You can't have any notar leftovers. There can be nothing left over. If it's there in the morning, you must immediately burn it. Okay? So Rav Amital is saying, oh, from that, I understand something about our mitzvah. Oh, really? Okay. See where he goes. One could say that regular meat begins to rot, but not holy meat. Surely holy meat cannot rot. But the Torah teaches that even sacrificial meat rots, goes bad, spoils. Why? That's why I have to make sure that I burn it the next morning, because if it's not refrigerated, they didn't have refrigeration. If I don't treat it right, it could make people sick. So he's saying there's a reason why the Torah prohibited the leftover sacrifices, because within a few hours, a day and a half, it's going to go bad. So therefore, you better burn it. And it has nothing to do with holiness. It's got to do with health. Holiness is different. Holiness is no different from the rules of nature. In fact, holiness means acting within nature. That's what Hashem is saying to Aharon through Moshe, and you'll see how it applies in just a minute. For this reason, a commandment in the parsha is, you shall not turn to deities, nor to molten gods, charms, amulets, superstitions. Don't do mumbo jumbo. Stay away from voodoo. Just do regular things. Talk to scientists and doctors. Don't talk to crackpots. Find out what the real nature of things are. The Torah teaches us that sanctity specifically means connection to reality and proper behavior. Thus, even the Cohanim must not ignore their healthy emotions. They must defile themselves to relatives. In other words, if God forbid a Kohen loses a child, God forbid that such a thing should happen, he's emotionally in a basket case. I mean, he's in bad shape. He has to go through the steps of what we call avelut, because the steps of avelut are very much like the psychological 5 steps of mourning. That many commentaries line them up exactly the same. You have to go through those stages. So of course, even though a Kohen has to be holy and he can miss a funeral of a neighbor or a third cousin, but if someone in his immediate family dies, he needs the steps of avelut to psychologically heal. So of course he has to do the steps of avelut for his 7 close relatives. Thus, even the Cohanim must not ignore their healthy emotions. They must defile themselves for relatives. The Midrash recounts that during the time of King David, even the young children were very knowledgeable in Torah. There's a Midrash about the little kids who go around quoting psukim. But the nation was nevertheless defeated numerous times in battle. In contrast, in the days of Achav, King Achav, who sacrificed one of his kids to a avodah zarah, was a terrible person, who was not a paragon of piety. He was a terrible person. Israel was victorious in war. When we talk about Jewish kings, we say Achav or Ahab was one of the worst. But when you look at historians who know the period when he ruled the northern kingdom, it was at its most glorious. He was a very successful king in terms of gashmias, in terms of physical stuff. But he was a loser when it came to spirituality. The Midrash explains that in the first case, Am Yisrael was knowledgeable in Torah, but there were informers amongst them. We weren't unified. People took the other side's position. During the reign of Achav, the nation was united. Beyond knowing Torah, it is also necessary that the nation be united, that we behave civilly towards each other. Boy, this should be, put on the desk of every member of the Knesset, right? That we must be united and we must behave civilly towards each other. This is what caused victory in the wars. We recently celebrated Yom HaAtzmaut and recalled the miracles that took place at the time of the establishment of the Medina, of the state. At that time, there were disagreements, but ultimately all were united around the idea of the state. I mean, we didn't have people going around. The Chazon Ish didn't say, "Oh, we shouldn't have a Medina." He didn't. He actually told people they could go fight. But today we have students of his, or people who claim to be students, who say, "Oh, we can't do anything for the Medina," and they just separate the state. It's terrible. Because of that unity, we merited victory. We win when we're united. So difficult. Heaven forbid that we now allow that unity to fall apart, inviting disasters, even though the Torah study situation is far better today than it was then. Only a couple of % of the population was sitting in yeshivas in 1948. Today, it's like 10%. It's ridiculously much higher. The sanctity that the Torah demands of a person is human sanctity, proper behavior between people. Hashem can take care of himself. We have to worry about the Jew next door, the person down the street. We're not interested in mystical sanctity. When we reach that level, we will be worthy of the commandment, "You shall be holy." It's only when we're nice and kind and considerate to each other that we're really holy and that our wonderful, beautiful Medina succeeds. It's when we're nasty to one another because we think we're better than somebody else, or because we think that because that person doesn't keep mitzvot as strictly as I do, that there's something wrong with him. When we have that kind of terrible attitudes towards each other and don't have v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, and we don't have love and sanctity in our behavior toward each other, that's when we're in trouble. I think this idea is paramount and is what is really going on in last week's Parsha and this week's Parsha and what should be happening in our own lives. But there is one more idea that I think is maybe not as powerful as the idea of Rav Amital, but I think just as important. The Netivot Shalom, who of course was the Shlomo Rebbe, and he died in the year 2000, and he also lived here during the miracles of the creation of the state and the 6-Day War and the Yom Kippur War. He died in 2000. So the Shlomo Rebbe said, "Speak to the Cohanim, the sons of Aharon, and say to them." Rashi explains the double language as warning the greater, the higher spiritually, about how to lead the lesser, the less knowledgeable, the less holy perhaps. The Midrash adds that the greater don't have as much of an evil inclination. If I'm spiritually high, I may, my Yetzer Hara, my evil inclination is a little bit weaker. It's not as powerful against me. The same is true about be holy and sanctified yourselves. Kadoshim to you, and then Kadesh Tatzmechem, sanctify yourselves. Again, the greater only need one warning, while the lower, the regular people like us, require repetition. First time it just says, be holy. The next says, be holy and sanctify yourselves, make yourselves holy. It is a mystery why the two areas requiring double warnings are the only two areas that get the double warnings after a single warning is be holy and don't become impure. The matter of the doubling of both be holy and being pure is because these issues affect the body and the soul. There is the tuma, the impurity of the mind and that of the body. That I can have tuma in my thoughts as well as I can have tuma in my body. We talked about that a couple of weeks ago, that you can get the tzara'at, you can get those different kinds of diseases because my body became impure, or I can just come into contact with a dead body and I become impure. That's my body, but my mind can also have tuma. We make ourselves holy from down below. First, we make our bodies holy from the ground up, and then on high, the person is sanctified from above by Hashem. This is also, and this is one of the reasons I put this here at the end, I think it's very important, this is also the matter of Sfirat HaOmer. We are preparing ourselves by counting day by day by day to get ready for Kabbalat Torah, for re-accepting the Torah again on Shavuot. We're preparing ourselves for re-accepting. It says accepting, but I'm going to add re-accepting the Torah on Shavuot. We must purify. Excuse me. We must purify our character, because purity in character, it's not just purity in my body. It's not just about staying away from tuma and being tahor. It's also about purity in character, in my midot, my character traits, becomes the vehicle, the merkava, for the immersion of the Jew in Torah. I come to Torah not through my purity, but through my character. This idea is hinted in the numerical value of the two words Lev Tov. Lev 32, Tov 17 gives us 49. The purpose of the Sfirat HaOmer isn't to make us holy per se, it's to make us good, to give me a good heart, to make us nice. And that is holy. We spend the 49 days of the Omer purifying ourselves in preparation for the annual reacceptance of the Torah. And the true preparation is a Lev Tov, to be a nice, good person. I remember Reb Shlomo Carlebach used to talk about Lag BaOmer, and he said people make a mistake. People think that the Ikar, the essence, is Lag BaOmer, the 33rd day of the Omer. Now, the 33rd day of the Omer was a very special day. There were miracles in the time of Rabbi Akiva. It's the Yortzeit, or the Hilula of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, this Thursday night into Friday. However, what Reb Shlomo used to say was, you can't have Lag BaOmer without Lev BaOmer. You can't have the 33rd day until you've counted the 32nd day, but you can't really have the spiritual amazing unity of Lag BaOmer unless the day before you've put it into your heart. And I think that idea is not just beautiful in terms of the Omer. I think it's also what's going on here, according to the Netivot Shalom and according to Rav Amital, that what the Torah is really telling us in these sections about being holy, it's really telling us be good, be nice, and most importantly, have a lev tov. And I hope everybody has a pleasant Lag BaOmer. I don't know if your grandchildren are around that you're going to go to their medurot, but I hope whether we go to a bonfire or not, I hope we imbibe the spirit of the day, which is to feel in the spirit of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai and of Rabbi Akiva, the holiness of the day, because we've been working on our lev throughout Sfirat HaOmer time. Okay, thank you very much for joining.
Thank
And
you. Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach. Have an enjoyable Lag BaOmer as well.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Bye-bye.
Chag Sameach.